Konnichiwa, minasan. O genki desu ka? Welcome to the intermediate course of my channel. Let's learn Japanese with Eric. If you have minimal background in the Japanese language or have limited knowledge of Japanese particles, adjective, and basic verb conjugation, or how Japanese sentences are put together, please review the playlist of the basic course, which covers lessons 1 to 31, and watch the video you need makeup lessons on. Otherwise, let's begin. Hajimemashou. In this new lesson, we will learn how to say the temporal expression before I, you, he, she, they, it, nani nani. It introduces a phrase or subordinate clause. To use a verb with before, the formula is to use the dictionary form of the verb plus mai ni. And the tense of the sentence is decided by the tense of the verb in the main clause, and not the subordinate clause, which is always in the dictionary form. To introduce a noun, such as when you say before class or before the party, the formula is to say the noun plus the particle no and then mai ni. The reason for this is that mai, which means front, is a noun, and the particle ni after it denotes specific time. Let's start with the verbs. If you recall the 10 basic verb conjugations, the conjugation that we use for before is the plain non-past affirmative, which is also the dictionary form of the verb. For example, the sentence, before I eat, I wash my hands. To eat is taberu, a category 1 verb, and wash is arau, a category 2 verb. The whole sentence in Japanese would be taberu mai ni te o araimasu. Taberu mai ni te o araimasu. Before I eat is the subordinate clause, and I wash my hands is the main clause. To review, a subordinate clause has a subject and verb, but is not a complete sentence because it doesn't convey a complete idea. They usually start off with a conjunction. In our example, the subordinate clause is before I eat, and it starts with a conjunction before. It has a subject I and a verb eat, but it doesn't convey a complete idea. Our main clause is I wash my hands. It is a complete sentence and complete idea by itself. Because the subject of both the subordinate and main clauses are the same, I, and because I is always the default subject, we do not need to mention it in the Japanese translation. The sentence, before I ate, I washed my hands. This is similar to the previous one, except that this time, the sentence is in the past tense. In Japanese, we say, taberu mai ni te o araimashita. Taberu mai ni te o araimashita. Note that in the English sentence, the verbs in the subordinate clause and the main clause have to be both in the past tense, ate and washed. However, in the Japanese sentence, the subordinate clause is still taberu mai ni, which is non-past. That is because in Japanese sentences, the tense is decided by the tense of the verb in the main clause. Another example, before I go home, I switch off the lights. The verb to go home is kairu, which is a category 2 verb. To switch off is kesu, which is also category 2. The whole sentence in Japanese is kairu mai ni denki wo keshimasu. Kairu mai ni denki wo keshimasu. And the past tense, before I went home, I switched off the lights. Kairu mai ni denki wo keshimashita. Kairu mai ni denki wo keshimashita. Again, note that in the Japanese sentence, the tense of the verb in the subordinate clause does not have to match the tense of the verb in the main clause, and that we always use the dictionary form of the verb to express before, kairu mai ni. The tense of the whole sentence is decided by the tense of the verb in the main clause, keshimashita, which is past. More examples, this time using a third-person subject. Before he married, he graduated university. To marry is kekkon suru, which is a category 3 verb. To graduate is sotsugyo suru, which is also category 3. Let's use the plain form this time. The whole sense in Japanese is 彼は結婚する前に大学を卒業した。彼は結婚する前に大学を卒業した。Let's go to Paris before we die. To go is 行く, a category 3 verb. To die is 死ぬ, which is category 2. The whole sense in Japanese is 死ぬ前にパリへ行こう。死ぬ前にパリへ行こう。In English, you have the choice of putting the subordinate clause before we die at the beginning or in the second part of the sentence. In Japanese, you must mention the subordinate clause first. 死ぬ前に and then the main clause パリへ行こう。It would be awkward to say it as last, as in パリへ行こう死ぬ前に. That would be wrong. The correct way is 死ぬ前にパリへ行こう。The sentence, aren't you going to the washroom before the test starts? To go is 行く, a category 3 irregular verb. And to start, as in something starts, is 始まる, a category 2 verb. In Japanese, we start with a subordinate clause. テストが始まる前に Then the main clause, which is an invitation. トイレに行きませんか? テストが始まる前にトイレに行きませんか? Note that for the subordinate clause, テスト takes the subject particle が and not は, because when the subject of the subordinate clause is different from that of the main clause, then the subject of the subordinate clause takes が, and the subject of the main clause typically takes は. In our example here, the subject of the main clause is you. Aren't you going to the washroom? She drinks milk before sleeping. To drink is nomu, category 2, and to sleep is neru, category 1. In Japanese, using formal form, 彼女は寝る前に牛乳を飲みます。彼女は寝る前に牛乳を飲みます。Mr. Smith phoned before coming. To phone is 電話する, and to come is 来る. In Japanese, using plain form, スミスさんは来る前に電話した。スミスさんは来る前に電話した。Now, let's look at when the before part uses a noun instead of a verb. The formula is Nounの前に. We use the particle no to connect the noun and 前 because 前 is technically a noun. Let's watch TV before dinner. To watch is 見る, a category 1 verb. In Japanese, 晩ご飯の前にテレビを見ましょう。晩ご飯の前にテレビを見ましょう。Won't you review before the test? To review is 復習する, which is category 3. We say before the test first in Japanese. テストの前に復習しませんか? テストの前に復習しませんか? He came to school before 8 a.m. To come is 来る, a category 3 verb. In Japanese, 彼は午前8時の前に来ました。彼は午前8時の前に来ました。Squirrels gather food before winter. To gather is 集める, a category 1 verb. In Japanese, リスは冬の前に食べ物を集める。リスは冬の前に食べ物を集める。Let's practice what we learned by translating these sentences into Japanese using formal verb forms. We will use verbs that we learned in lessons 26 to 30. These lessons also explain how you form the plain and formal verb forms in Japanese. How do you say in Japanese? You insert money before pushing the button. ボタンを押す前にお金を入れます。ボタンを押す前にお金を入れます。 Before eating, Japanese say いただきます。日本人は食べる前にいただきますと言います。日本人は食べる前にいただきますと言います。Let's buy a ticket before getting on the bus. バスに乗る前に切符を買いましょう。バスに乗る前に切符を買いましょう。Now, let's translate these Japanese sentences that use plain verb forms into English. 寝る前に歯を磨く。寝る前に歯を磨く。I brush my teeth before sleeping. 彼女は帰る前に映画を見た。彼女は帰る前に映画を見た。Before she went home, she saw a movie. 料理する前に材料を準備しよう。料理する前に材料を準備しよう。Let's prepare the ingredients before cooking. Same thing, please translate these Japanese sentences that use formal verb forms into English. お客さんが来る前に彼は部屋を掃除しました。お客さんが来る前に彼は部屋を掃除しました。He cleaned the room before the guest arrived. 東京へ帰る前に会いましょうか。東京へ帰る前に会いましょうか。Shall we meet before I return to Tokyo? 子供たちが起きる前にお父さんは朝ごはんを作ります。子供たちが起きる前にお父さんは朝ごはんを作ります。Dad makes breakfast before the kids wake up. Translate the following English sentences into Japanese using plain verb forms. Before the war, she was an English teacher. 戦争の前に彼女は英語の先生だった。戦争の前に彼女は英語の先生だった。Before the trip, let's study Japanese. 旅行の前に日本語を勉強しよう。旅行の前に日本語を勉強しよう。Won't you practice before the competition? 試合の前に練習しない？試合の前に練習しない？ To summarize, in this lesson, you learned how to express before I, you, he, she, they, nani nani in Japanese. The formula for this is dictionary form of the verb or ru form plus mai ni. For nouns, when we say, for example, before the test or before the party, we say noun no mai ni. The particle no connects the noun to mai, which is technically a noun. Because before nani nani introduces a subordinate clause, the subject of the subordinate clause, if it is different from that of the main clause, takes the particle ga. The final tense of the sentence is decided by the tense of the verb in the main clause, so that even if the whole sentence is in the past, the before part still uses the dictionary form of the verb, ru mai ni. So this ends our lesson on expressing before. I look forward to delivering the next video lesson, which is on, you guessed it right, how to express after. So see you then. Ganbarimashou. If you're serious about becoming fluent in Japanese, it's important to practice daily, learn grammar, and build up vocabulary. My whole course is designed to give you a strong basic foundation in the Japanese language that you can build solidly on. So please click like, share, or subscribe, and watch the next video in the series. 日本語の勉強に頑張ってください。じゃあまたね。